So I'll record now, and I'm just going to share Harry's presentation on my screen. Just a moment there, I'll get it started. Okay, can everyone see the presentation full screen? Yeah, good. Okay, great. Harry, take it away. Thank you. Harry Eckman from Change for Animals Foundation. Oh, Harry, your microphone is muted.
Unmuting my audio.
There we go.
Hi. Thanks so much for asking me to speak today. Really a pleasure to talk about this issue. And as Craig said, I'm going to start talking about the human behavior change aspect and human behavior change in relation to animals and the choices we make and the decisions that we make, our attitudes and behaviors towards animals, and particularly farmed animals, looking at what we do, looking at what we don't do, and the influences that force us or convince us to change or alter our behavior. Next slide. So human behavior is the root of most animal welfare issues around the world. And so why do we need to understand human behavior? For that very reason, the secret to changing behavior isn't so much understanding what we do, but it's understanding why we do it. And the why is different for everyone. Why do we, or should we, care about animal welfare or animals? Why do we make the food choices that we make in relation to animals? Why do we choose what to eat or what not to eat? And obviously being aware of the impact that those choices have on animals, particularly farmed animals. And the impact of those choices is not just on the environment, but obviously on our health and animals, and yet we still make those choices. And so to illustrate that, next slide. Around 2 in every 3 farm animals is factory farmed around the world. So that's about 50 billion animals each year. So the impact that we have by our choices and the impact that we have on animals is huge. And the suffering that is caused by that is immense. These numbers are staggering. That's 50 billion factory farmed animals, by the way. The number of actually farmed animals is closer to 80 billion. So that's an awful lot of animals. But it's not just farm animals that we're talking about, the impact of our choices. We're talking about Farm Animal Day here, but we have to acknowledge that this impact of our choices affects others as well. Next slide, please. Around 42 million acres of forest in Asia, Africa, and Latin America are being destroyed every single year to support and sustain farm animal agriculture. And so the impact goes beyond farm animal species. Deforestation, land use, kills and displaces millions of other animals and decimates biodiversity and ecosystems. So these are things that are also impacted by the choices that we make, our behaviors and our attitudes. Next slide, please. And I'm going to mention fish just because it's a little bugbear of mine, and I'm going to take this opportunity to mention it. But between 1 and 3 trillion fish are caught every single year. Some fish are farmed, some fish are wild caught. But when we're talking about numbers, let's just note that if farm animals are 80 billion, that number is dwarfed by the fishing industry. And if we're concerned about the welfare of animals, which of course we are, then we need to understand the impact that we're having on that wider scale by our attitudes and behaviors. I mean, how little do you have to consider a particular species that 2 trillion is an acceptable margin of error when you're talking about the numbers that we're talking about with fish? But back to farm animals. Next slide, please. Let's go back to our food choices and why we do what we do. Human nature is very good at switching our minds off to things that make us uncomfortable and justifying our actions. It's confirmation bias. We're looking for evidence to support the things that we do and ignoring the things that don't support that position that we have. We don't want animals to suffer. We rather they didn't, and we want them to have good welfare, and we want them to have a life worth living. But we'll make bargains and we'll take small steps, and each person is on their own path to deciding where they are comfortable in the choices they make and the decisions that they make in relation to how we treat animals, how we use animals. There's other contributing factors like the shared values, the culture that we live in, the people around us, our family, our friends, our work colleagues, the environment, things like the availability of alternative choices or a willingness for the individual to push a little bit further in the choices that they make. But like I said, these things are different for everybody. And so we have to understand our own attitudes and behaviors and what molds them so that we can realize the true impact that it's having on farm animals. Next slide, please, Craig. So take a second, audience out there in Zoom land, and ask yourself why you've made the food choices that you have. Whether you eat meat or don't eat meat, or eat meat occasionally, or choose ethically sourced meat, or if you're flexitarian, pescatarian, vegetarian, vegan, wherever you position yourself, whether you label yourself or not, you've made decisions about the food that you eat, where you buy it from, the choices that you've made. And those could be related, and probably are related, to all of these things: animal welfare, health and well-being, climate change, deforestation, ecosystems, pollution, all of the things that are listed there. So have a think about what it is that influences your behavior and the attitudes. And again, the difference, it's going to be different for every single person. Next slide, please. In the book Eating Animals by Jonathan Safran Foer, he says, do you eat chicken because you're familiar with the scientific literature on them and have decided that their suffering doesn't matter? Or do you do it because it tastes good? And food and the act of eating and sharing a meal with family and friends and the traditions and the cultures that are tied up with food are so part of our memories and our emotions and our lives and our stories that it's a hard thing to push aside. But the welfare of animals and farmed animals depends on our ability to do exactly that. But is improvement of animal welfare a reason or an outcome of our choices? And the truth is, it's a little bit of both. Next slide, please. So this little illustration here, this pile of rocks, this illustration is by Trent Grassian, who is also one of the advisors on human behavior change for animals. And this really illustrates how we make our decisions. And this is subconscious. This is going on underneath in our brains every time we make a choice. There are three foundational stones there: time, money, and knowledge. Any decision that we make about our food choices or the way in which we do something that impacts the welfare of animals and farm animals is dependent on the time we have, what we can afford, and what we know. And we have to have those things as a foundation. And then on top of that, we have all the other stuff: the social impact, the availability of choices, the convenience of choices, our own personal identity. Am I the kind of person that does this or believes that? Our awareness of issues, the taste of food, the ethics, the health. And all of these things go on every time we make a choice. Now, we don't freeze and stop and pause and think about these things. These happen subconsciously every time we do it. But this is the process that goes on inside our heads. And so we have to understand that all of these are factors in every decision that we make. Next slide, please. One of my favorite illustrations to show the level of processes that go on and the way in which we can and do make changes to our choices and our attitudes and our behaviors is this analogy, which is the rider, the elephant, and the path. And this explains in a really nice way, I think, the dynamics of the different aspects of what changes our behavior. Next slide, please. So the rider, when we're talking about making decisions, we need to be able to direct the rider. And the rider is our rational side. It's the part of us that justifies or rationalizes our choices and decisions. It's the one that's all based on knowledge. It's the part of us that we like to think is in control. When we read a book and we have a wealth of information about animal welfare, the rider is the one that recalls that knowledge and goes, if we do this, this will impact animals in this way. It likes facts, and the rider likes science and evidence and statistics and things like that. And the rider knows that animals suffer, and he knows the choices that impact their welfare. And he often thinks he's in control because he has all of this information. But he can easily lose the control because he's on an elephant. And so next slide, please. So the elephant is our emotional side, and it's way bigger than our rational side. And so the way that we want to change behavior in relation to the elephant is to motivate it. The elephant is the part of us that wants to do things or doesn't want to do things on a much more emotional and basic level. It's the part of us that needs motivating with more than just rational reason. Sometimes it's happy to be told what to do by the rider, but then there are deeper rooted things like food choices, and when they take their hold, the rider often gets ignored. Now, this emotional side can work for and against animal welfare. The emotions associated with food and eating are really strong. They're rooted in family and history and taste and things like that, but so is our empathy and compassion for animals, and the emotions that are related to the suffering that our choices contribute towards. And we sometimes fall back on the rider to self-justify the choices after the elephant has made them. An example of this, a non-animal welfare example of this would be smoking. If anybody has smoked in the past, if somebody asks you, why did you quit smoking? You're going to say, because it's bad for me. But it's not like you didn't know it was bad for you when you were smoking. So that wasn't the reason you stopped. There were other factors. But what you do is you take a rational rider element and self-justify and explain your decisions afterwards. But it's much more than that. And then next slide, please. And then we have the path and shaping the path. The path is our environment. It's the situation around us, and it's the influence of others. And this is a hugely important factor. The people around us are so influential on the choices that we make and the impact that we can have on animals. And the part of us that's shaped by the world, the flatter and smoother that it is, the easier it is for the rider and the elephant to just trundle along without thinking about it too much. In an ideal world, we want our food choices and the impact that they subsequently have on farm animals to not really be choices at all. We want them to be normal and mainstream and convenient. That's why, for example, there's a huge growth in things like meat alternatives now, like Beyond Burger and Impossible Foods. These are all path-based influences. We don't have to think about, what do I do if I want to eat something that's meat but doesn't have an impact on farm animals? The choice is there. So the rider and the elephant just go, the rider goes, I fancy a burger. This is an ethical, plant-based alternative. The elephant's going, yeah, tastes like a burger, so I'm happy with that. And the path is going, here it is. You don't really have to think too much about the choice. And so these three elements, the elephant, the rider, and the path, are all constantly in play with the choices that we make. And they all directly impact and are impacted by the world around us and the farm animals that are affected by our choices. Next slide, please. What we're aiming for is a kinder world. And to use another analogy by Jonathan Safran-Foer, the Eating Animals book that I mentioned before, think of a situation. Is there any chance that half of the population in the world would be vegetarian in 10 years? He asks. And the chances of that are slim. Not impossible, but slim. Is there any chance that half the meals in the world that are eaten would be vegetarian meals? Well, yes, there's a very good chance of that. And for the animals, it doesn't really matter whether half the people are vegetarian or half the meals are vegetarian. The outcome is the same. It's a better world for animals. And so that's what we're aiming for. And understanding the impact of our behavior in that context on a global scale as well as an individual scale, we need to move away from this binary, are you vegetarian, somebody who cares or doesn't care? Because what we're talking about here is the impact that all of our choices have on farmed animals. We need to be conscious of the rider and our elephant and using our lobbying and buying power to shape the path so it's as wide and animal friendly as possible. And for the people that care, there's lots of different paths that we can take as we try and move to a kinder and more compassionate world, where we have to ensure that the welfare of animals is key to all of the choices that we make. And last slide. That's it from me. Thank you very much. And I'm going to hand over, I think, to Dave now, who will take on the next part.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Harry. Before we welcome Dave to the floor, I'd just like to reiterate for everyone watching on Facebook that we are getting your questions, and we'll field them at the end at the Q&A. So thanks again, Harry, for a fantastic talk. And we're now going to hear from Dave Neale, Animal Welfare Director of Animals Asia.
Thanks very much, Harry, and thanks very much, Craig, for putting this together, and everybody who's out there listening. It's great to be involved in this and to be asked to give a talk. As we said at the start, then this is something which is, I'm just sharing my screen, there we go. This is something which is passionate for all of us. For me in particular, then, I have a particular passion for this in regards to the educational side and how our behaviour can be changed by the knowledge that we have in particular. And so listening to what you've said, Harry, obviously resonates a lot with regards, particularly with regards that those different messages and the different ways that we make our decisions, knowledge, time and money. I suppose the aspect which I'm going to talk about a little bit more is really knowledge, and with that then to try to sort of look at these aspects of sentience and the emotional and these cognitive lives of farm animals. So to jump straight in, then, as we know, all animals are sentient beings. They have these the cognitive, the social, the emotional capacities which are very similar to ourselves, and therefore what happens to all of these individuals that we're farming matters to those individuals. The lives that we create for those individuals matters to those individual animals just as much as the lives that we live and the way that we live matters to us. And this is something which I think we can bring into our discussions with people a little bit more, into our sort of educational and awareness programs a little bit more, to get down to. And sometimes I suppose with farm animal welfare, sometimes as Harry emphasized, sometimes we're talking about such big numbers, it's hard to think about the actual individual animals within those numbers. 50 billion, 80 billion, 3 trillion fish. Each one of those fish is having an emotional experience within itself throughout its life, positive and negative, and trying to sort of get that across in the way that we talk, the images that we put out there. I think is very important to be able to get people to actually think and to get the knowledge that maybe is needed to be able to make some of those changes, which is what we're asking for. But we're up against it, and we're up against it really because of the way that our society is set up. Here is two classic images which straight away, will one of which already says KFC, the other one shouts out Burger King or McDonald's or wherever. And wherever you are in the world now, these are the sort of images that you're seeing. These sort of images are on billboards, they're on the TV, wherever you look, this is the way that animals are being presented to people, because this has become something which is socially acceptable, it's legally acceptable, it's something which is promoted, obviously, for people, it's marketed to us. And therefore it encourages the younger generation, obviously, to follow this path. that many of us have already followed, in terms of just accepting that this is the way that we use animals, and by doing so, then children within our society, which is obviously from where I'm coming from here, in terms of trying to sort of influence behaviour right at the level of the young child, children are less likely to question the morality of using animals in this way if they can see, or if they're being led down this path by the adults that they trust within their lives. And obviously then this can actually go even further, where in some areas, particularly within Asia, but also within live markets within America as well, then these are the sort of images which people have been presented with, and these are the sort of things which people are seeing on a regular basis. Animals which are obviously in a terrible conditions, but by seeing these images on a regular basis, again, it's habituating young children in particular to these situations, and therefore it's very difficult to be able to change somebody's behavior when all they've been seen, or the way that they've been led, is that this is the way that society treats animals, and this is something which is legally acceptable way to treat animals. So we're up against it, but we must remember that children are not born with any ingrained behavior or any preconceptions, and so therefore that has to come about by the actions of the people which are leading them or teaching them in some sense. We can, if children are born into an environment where all animals are equal, where all animals are respected, then they can very much grow up like this young girl here, just seeing cows like they would see maybe, you know, dogs and cats and other animals. And yet the society then kind of brings people away from that, and obviously goes more towards this animals being there for us to be able to use. And so we have to try to find a way really of how we can address this. And also, I mean, even within our schooling systems, you know, even within one single day, then children can get very mixed messages from the people that they trust. So you know, schools, you know, may well take people on field visits to see animals, and this is part of the curriculum of trying to encourage people to be able to connect with animals and respect animals. And that may well be to go to a farm. You can see on the one side of the picture here, you know, the children are meeting with individual cows. So great, exactly all the things that we've just talked about, getting to know these individuals, getting to know them. They're probably named cows that they get introduced to, and they get to feed and they get to pat. But then go back to school, and then the school dinner may well be that they're eating beef, or they're eating another animal, or they're drinking milk from those cows. And so those messages are really mixed in terms of the way that our society is kind of creates the dialogue, I guess, around the way that we see animals. And so it's understandable that then children's behavior just follows the behavior of the adults which are leading them, and can be very mixed in terms of what is right and what is wrong, and difficult for us to be able to get people to see animals in a different way. It's also something which it then we need to look outside of the school system. One of the ways which we could have tried to tackle this is looking at welfare issues. And so, you know, one of the things that often as animal welfare organisations do, we go into detail about the way that animals are being raised. In this case, the way that pigs are being raised, and just some of the words that we might be using here in terms of the animals, the mutilations that animals are suffering, for us to actually keep them in the conditions that they are, the cruelty that they may experience, or the suffering that they might experience in intensive farming situations, the use of antibiotics, etc. And then some of the emotional experiences of the animals in terms of how they might be stressed or how they might be fearful. But these are all kind of negative messages which are essential, and it's something that we need to get across to people in terms of the way that animals are treated and how their welfare is impacted. And obviously, if we're trying to move people away completely from eating animals, or if we're just trying to move people from looking at moving away from the intensive production of animals to something which is slightly it has a higher welfare, then this is the type of messages that we obviously need to use. But it's often these messages which people are quite easy to turn away from, because obviously people. So I believe that we have to start to look differently at the way that we raise awareness and the way that we educate people. And I always call these the animal concepts. And this is something which is not just relevant to farm animals; it can be relevant to any animal situation, really. And I truly believe it's an area within our educational system in particular that we are not utilizing enough, and something that we really do need to try to push to get these messages into the educational system much more. And outside of the educational system, within our own awareness, within our own organizations, we need to be framing these messages around these concepts. So these are the concepts of the fact that animals are experiencing emotional experiences, both positive and negative emotional experiences, the cognitive abilities of animals, their level of intelligence relevant to them and their environment, their ability to problem solve, their ability to memorize other animals within their group, etc. The bonds particularly between the parents, in many cases the mother, but also the fathers as well, and the infants, and just how important that is for all animals. And that obviously is very important for farm animals as well. The social bonds as well, so the necessity that animals have, that many animals have, to live within social groups. And then things such as like the importance of play, being happy, being in an environment which creates happiness, which encourages joy and happiness, is important, just as important for animals as it is for us. And then obviously these natural behaviors, being able to carry out those natural behaviors. And I think for people to really understand what welfare is, then you really need to be able to understand these broader concepts before you can then you can relate the situation that animals are in with regards why it might be having a negative impact upon their welfare. So going back to pigs then, rather than maybe just talking about some of the issues with regards the suffering and the welfare problems, then we can use these much more positive messages to fundamentally try to connect or change people's behaviors in some way. So we can look at how, you know, that pigs in an extensive environment will be optimistic. They will play. They will experience a sense of happiness. They can understand each other. They will create incredibly strong social bonds with each other. The pigs and the piglets will have incredibly strong maternal bonds, etc. And these are the kind of messages which I think we now need to be using much more within our conversation when we're talking about all animals, but in this case with farm animals, if we really want people to be able to make that decision and have that knowledge about what the impact of their choices really is. So just looking at some of these examples, then we've got things like hens form very strong bonds and friendships. We know that hens will associate in a flock of hens, then individual hens will associate with other individuals. They will create these friendships, and if allowed, they will spend time together. They will feed together, they will preen together, they will dust spade together, they will sleep in the same environment. They have these hierarchies where certain individuals obviously have a higher status than other individuals, and they can remember the associations that they have throughout their time together over long periods of time, exactly the way that we live within our own society. We remember the associations that we have with individuals over periods of times. We have preferred individuals that we want to spend time with, and maybe other individuals that we choose not to spend time with. Hens have this very similar capacity, and if allowed to, will adopt these very similar behaviours. Pigs, we're talking about their parental bonds and the importance of parental bonds. Pigs, sows before they give birth, will have a desire to build a nest for their piglets. And if given the situation, if given substrates, etc., they will build a very comfortable nest. Again, similar to ourselves, we want to create an environment for our babies before they come into the world, which is comfortable for them. Then animals such as pigs will do exactly the same thing. Cows have an incredibly strong relationship with their calves. Cows, if allowed to, a cow and its calf, the mother and its calf, will stay together for the first 3 years of its life, very, very closely bonded. And the female calves and the cows are likely to stay together for the rest of their lives if they're allowed to. They wouldn't necessarily separate from each other. They would associate with each other because they have this strong bond. And females together will bond together to help each other, to look after each other's calves. So again, if they're provided with an extensive environment, then the calves will come together. An individual, a mother cow, will stay with those calves and kind of watch over them whilst the other mothers have some time away to go and feed and do the things that they need to do. And again, this is very similar to our own behaviours, and this is something which we see if animals such as cows are allowed to live in that kind of way. Hens talk, or they communicate with their chicks inside the eggs. So there's already a relationship which is developing between a mother hen and the chick before it hatches, with the chick emitting some calls to the mother, which the mother will then respond to. So if the chick inside the egg maybe is feeling cold, then it will emit a call. The mother will respond to that by tucking the egg underneath her to ensure that it stays warm. And she will also provide comforting communication coos back to the hen to ensure that they all know that they're back to the chicks, I should say, to ensure they know they're safe. And the chicks actually will communicate with each other, and this is something we see within lots of different animals in this kind of situation, which then encourages them all to hatch at a similar time. Sheep understand the emotions of other sheep. Sheep can have an ability similar to ourselves to be able to understand when another sheep within its flock, within its sort of friendship group, is either feeling stressed, or it's feeling calm, or it's feeling happy, and that will influence their behavior. So this emotional contagion, which we talk about in many species, happens within many farm animals. This is just an example within sheep. And sheep are known then to prefer to spend time with other sheep which are much more sort of optimistic about their environment, rather than other sheep which are experiencing some form of stress. Pigs actually sing to their piglets, and I put this one in because anybody who's had children will know it's something which when young children are feeding, then it's something which we generally do, which is why the basis of having sort of nursery rhymes, of kind of calming children down either when they're feeding or when they're going to sleep. Pigs do something very similar. They do this very kind of this low kind of humming noise to their piglets when they're suckling, and again, it's potentially thought to be to try to calm the piglets down, to de-stress them, so that everybody gets to eat in a much more calm manner. Hens are excellent teachers. The mother hen, once the chicks have hatched, will teach those chicks how to find food, where to find food, what type of food they should be eating. They will pick up bits of food and drop it again so the chicks will eat it. And if the chick starts to eat something which is inappropriate, then the mother will behave in a way which the chicks can understand they shouldn't be eating that particular food item. So they're learning from the mother all the time. So the mother is acting as that educator, as that teacher for those chicks as they grow up. And it's these messages then which I think we can start to use to then to bring into the situations that we're trying to change. So rather than just maybe talking about, in this case, it's obviously hens on a conventional battery farm, rather than maybe just talking about some of the welfare problems which are associated with the way that these animals are being kept. And obviously we can see just by looking at them, then these animals are in a very bad physical way. We can see just by the state that they look at, the look in their eyes, that they are experiencing some negative type of emotions. But that friendship here is obviously is potentially here between these two hens, in that they've, even in this dire situation, they've tried to eke out some kind of comfort within each other by developing this friendship, which is so important to them. We can see from this picture where a mother looks like it's been separated from its piglets and it's reaching out to touch its piglet. We can talk about the importance of those parent and those infant bonds for pigs, and how the systems that we use to farm animals often don't allow the expression of those behaviors. Or we can look back at the fact that pigs will build nests for their piglets, and in many cases, particularly within intensive systems, they're not allowed to. So they're in this very harsh environment where they're not being allowed to carry out those natural behaviours. And then talk about the frustrations that are obviously coming through that for the individual pig, and how those pigs must feel, and how stressed it must make those pigs feel not to be able to carry out those those important behaviours to them. Cows make milk for their babies. This is just something which you can see from this picture is obviously going to be causing stress to these individual mother cows. The calves have been born and then have been separated from their mothers, no doubt for them to be taken away, obviously for us then to be able to obtain the milk from the mothers. And a situation which is then going to be causing a huge amount of stress, both for the calf but also for the mother, because we have a better understanding of the emotional experiences of these particular animals, these individuals, and how important that bond is between the mother cow and the calf. Again, sheep are bonded to their babies. This is a picture taken when lambs are being removed from their mothers, again to be sent off for the lambs to be sent off for slaughter. And if anybody's been around sheep when this is happening, then you can you can hear it as much as anything else, in terms of just the anguish and the suffering within the calls from the mothers, which can last for a long period of time after these lambs have disappeared out of sight. And this is again because of this really important bonds that females have with their babies. And then obviously we're back to cows again. Cows grieve for their calves, or at least they will be showing behaviors which are similar to behaviors which we would see when we were feeling some kind of anguish and suffering because of the loss of an individual. And again, if you've been around cows when they've had their calves removed, then it's something which you can just sense. You don't really need to have a huge amount of scientific background to know that those individual animals are showing behaviors which are negative to them, and they're suffering because again of this importance of these social bonds that they develop. And so these are the kind of messages which I think now we need to be looking into and bringing into some of the conversations that we have. And within Animals Asia, then we've created a whole series of graphics which are based around the messages which we just talked about before. These are the English versions. Obviously, Animals Asia works within China and Vietnam. We've got Chinese versions of these and Vietnamese versions of these. And these are being used within our awareness raising and our educational programs. And again, it's really then going back to those messages. So similar to what we said earlier with regards pigs, here for hens, we can use, there are so many different things that we can talk about which go beyond just the suffering of the hen in a factory, in an intensive factory farm, we can talk about these from a much more positive messaging. And again, the same sort of things with cows. And these again are just some examples of those things where we're bringing in all of those different aspects of the emotional experiences that these individual animals, the capacity to have these different emotions and their cognitive abilities. And so it's really, I guess, going back to those core concepts of the emotional experiences that animals have, their cognitive abilities, and this importance of these bonds and importance of being in these natural environments, and trying now to sort of convey those messages in our educational and our awareness programs to underpin the welfare side, or the potential suffering that these animals are experiencing, and again to try to appeal to people from a much more kind of personal level and on the individual level, to try to get people to actually see animals as individuals and see animals in a similar eyes to us that we might see ourselves, and to be able to recognize ourselves within these animals. And again, just to show, these were just some slides, just some examples. These are the messages now that, as you know, Animals Asia isn't particularly is not a farm animal welfare organisation. We're much more involved with captive wild animals, and so we've created these messages not just for farm animals, but also for many of the wild animals that we advocate on behalf of as well. But we deliver this now within schools across China and starting to within Vietnam, and we're developing these curricula, particularly within China at the moment, which are based around the concept. So they're not just based around what it's like for a hen in a factory farm, or what it's like on a pig farm and some of the welfare problems. They're based really around the emotional experiences that animals have, the cognitive experiences, the cognitive abilities that animals have. And it's really those messages which I think we need to start bringing into the public eye a little bit more, so that people can have that knowledge to hopefully drive the decision making and the change that we're looking for in terms of their behavior towards much more sort of animal friendly purchases. Thank you very much indeed.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Dave. It's a great presentation. I'm a huge fan of the idea as well of animal concepts. Just a quick note that we had scheduled to run to 11:15 to give time for the Q&A as well. So I'd love to comment on Dave's great presentation, but just in the interest of time, we'll move straight on to Manoj, and we'll take some questions at the end. So thanks again, Dave. And we're now pleased to hear from Manoj Gautam, who's Executive Director of the Jane Goodall Institute of Nepal. Thanks, Manoj.
Thank you, Craig. Hello, everyone. I feel really honored to have been asked for the talk. If we can, do I do the sharing, or is that something that you would be doing?
Either or. I have your presentation, so either you can share, which is maybe easier, or I can do it for you, whichever.
Let me quickly get it on. Right, are we there?
Yeah, perfect. We can see your screen. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, both Harry and Dave, for setting up the background and pretty much everything, laying out the foundation for what I will be talking about in the most brilliant way. Of course, Harry is a veteran in the field of the practice and propagating the idea of human behavior change as a tool for achieving heightening animal welfare standards. And of course, Dave's expansive and intensive experience in the field has in itself, it's needless for me to try and highlight it. We just heard all the words of wisdom The two things that I would like to highlight here that has been very beautifully established is the first thing is the sentience. So, I will not even go in that direction. We all know, and most of the people who I believe are the viewers here today, we're from the similar kind of thinking at least. So, I will not waste any time trying to establish the sentience, which these two veterans have already very beautifully done. The other thing is establishing the idea of human behavior change as a brilliant tool, which has been, again, done in both the presentations. What I will be talking about might sound a little random, but then I will just try to make more on like hands-on, more on the field, practice-based commentaries, if I may, that some of you might actually find relevant. And my idea is not to produce answers or anything like that, but just to give more food for thought in the realm of the subject that we're talking about. So basically, we've talked about education or sensitization as one of the human behavior change tools, which is a very common tool. Harry earlier established different reasons why people make their choices. It could be so many different. I've just basically summarized it. It's because of the sentience, that triggers the moral and religious reasons. Health aspect, like this self-consciousness, they're worried about them, or they're concerned about their own well-being. There's a larger concern about climate sustainability, more on the ecological and environmental side of things, and then also zoonosis and pandemic threat angle, which also has the economic angle, which is something that we've been very much hearing lately since the since this COVID crisis pandemic that we've all suffered from. Basically, the idea is we have, since the human behavior change has broke the surface in the field of animal welfare. We've had a couple of very successful conferences, and the human behavior change for animal welfare as an entity has been doing a brilliant job in promoting this notion, practice, and as a tool as well. For quite a while now. So I do not need to go there much. I will just try to highlight a few experiences of my own, in the quest of using the idea and the practice of human behavior change. Education is something that we've all used. Again, there could be pros and cons based on how I think we've come that far using this or in the practice of human behavior change, to realize that certain things, might have positive, regardless of the intention, might have positive or negative impact, and that is something that, as a practitioner or as an interventionist, as a driver of change, we all need to, be very mindful of, look at as many case studies as possible, and also, even though we have, come solidly, a decade or more. In the quest of using human behavior change as a tool for achieving animal welfare standards, but I think we still are young in that field enough for us to be more vigilant and more cautious, and also slightly research oriented, keep a track of what has brought what sort of results, and that positive negative balance thing is very important, because each case studies, it's projects or initiatives that we might have been running in our own field and area, is of some significance, because it can feed into the larger quest of understanding, trying to understand how we can best use the concept and practice of human behavior change. That's that. One of the really interesting things that I noticed working in Asia, and particularly in a country like Nepal, is there's this dichotomy, there's this dualism in the traditional setting of the conditions of farm animals, and the modern practices, as you can see represented by these two pictures. This one is from the Himalayas, where if I may, the life standard of people and animals are not, like there's not much of discrepancy between the standards of how people are living and how the animals are living. Of course, the animals are getting slaughtered at the end, but there's that comparative side of things that triggers whole another kind of set of emotions, even among the practice, not like myself. But then there's this modern practices. Most often, as a change inducer, we tend to think that the cruelty that resides within the traditional practices, within the traditionality of how we as human beings deal with farm animals, the traditional uses, milking, eggs and whatnot, and of course butchering, the traditional ways of doing things, and the intensity and the magnitude of cruelty that exist in those practices. And now we've tried to change things, we've tried to standardize things, whether it's slaughtering or whether it's milking. It has both pros and cons. Again, it depends on the intention. Most of the time, the driver is the economy, because that's where the bigger institutions are more interested in or more inclined towards the governments and the big businesses, which is why we heard earlier that this whole idea of trying to address the mass through the use of education and sensitization is really important. This is something that we'll be discussing later on. But this is something that really interesting, because we need to understand our world. And sometimes if we are in the more traditionally inclined part of the world and the practices, then it basically calls for a completely different set of educational intervention, because most of the educational tools and materials that we have been using, that we just even saw in the past two presentations, might actually not be that relevant, and might even trigger unwanted attention or ruckus in that setting. So this is something that I find really interesting about how to go about this while things are changing very fast, but then at the same time we're critical of the past, we're critical of the traditionality, but then the modernity, it looks even more scary. I'll give you an example of Nepal. Like 15-20 years ago, people, like majority of the population of Nepal did not know what sausage is, like salami, this, that, pastrami. I don't even know, like, what different forms of processed meat and those kind of things exist. But most of the Nepalese denizens did not even know about much of that, and now it's being introduced. Markets being flooded with those kind of materials. Availability. We talked about availability. It's not the conscious choice that people are making. It's not the rationality. It is simply availability and the taste. It's just on the elephant phase, basically. The elephant is just going, following the emotion and following the convenience. That's something Harry highlighted earlier. One of the basic idea about human behavior change is, unless the process of change is made easier, or like the general tendency is that people go for convenience. So keeping that in mind, the whole idea of shifting from the traditionality to modern practices is because it's convenient, to make more bucks, and that is what I want to come into later. But it is very interesting, and it's very important to understand the dichotomy and the dualism of our world, that there's this traditional side of things and the modernity. Also, one of the things that the human behavior change practitioners, with the intention of settings or height, taking the animal welfare standards to certain heights, are facing is there's that counter lobbying. Like human behavior change, we were using human behavior change ideas and tactics, if I may, to induce that, to harness on the sentimentality and the emotional side of things, and the information and rationality, convenience, and everything to address the animal welfare issues. But the opposite is doing exactly the same, and has been doing for quite a while. Governments are still promoting about consumption of meat, positively promoting higher intake of meat and animal products. Supranational bodies like United Nations entities are still found to be basically promoting the positive health aspect of meat consumption and so on. There's fierce lobbying and campaigning of like there's the same thing from the dairy industry, from the poultry industry. If you see in Nepal's poultry industry alone holds more than 4% of the total GDP. So you can imagine the level of the intensity of the pull that these money making giants that have on the government's will to work on this. So it has been working, like full-fledged. It has been working on that, and it will be working on those things, and it will be symbolically and also strategically hindering our kind of SBC practice. Likewise, there are many popular TV shows and programs, like that I personally find can be quite a counter for our kind of work, because the way they are shown, they use all the things to entice Harry's elephant. Because it's easy that way, it's quick, it's easy, it works, it's efficient, and there are many lollipops that way that can easily lure Harry's elephant, and the driver, most of the time basically has to be, helpless. So the message for practitioners, for my fellow welfare activists or interventionists, is that we really need to look deeper into these aspects about how we can do better in terms of dealing with this countering or existing foundational enemies, if I may, in that regard, because they do exist on the institutional level. They exist. We have used education sensitization much on the public level. One thing that I deal with back in Kathmandu is dealing with dog population management, and what we most very often talk about dog population management is the management of dog population. Things are done to dogs. People are constantly doing things to dogs. Dogs are neutered, dogs are vaccinated, dogs are rescued, dogs are picked from A to B, dogs are translocated, dogs are sometimes culled even or euthanized. Everything is happening to the dogs. Like people are, the interventionists, even the welfareists are doing things to dogs. And that is something that we highlight to show why this is a human problem and not a dog problem, and things need to be done on the humans, on the human side, rather than like focusing on the dog side, because dogs, if the human side, which is the root of the problem, if that's not addressed, then the dogs will keep on reproducing, and every single generation of dog will have to go through the same intervention from very good, well-intentioned, welfareists. Likewise, when we talk about human behavior change now, of course, one thing that we have noticed, this is something that I'll come in the next slide, but we have seen that it works, of course, on the very individual to individual denizen level, citizen level, sensitizing works. But again, I think it is time we need to focus on the institutional level of intervention as well, rather than on the very individual level. Individual level, I think we're doing really well, globally speaking. The veganism movement, I will come to that in my next slide. But this is time we start really hitting hard. Of course, there are some brilliant initiatives going on that I personally know of, and there might be many others that I don't. But we really need to start looking into the institutional level and be able to deal with those giants that on themselves have a capacity to address and influence larger mass, which they're doing opposite to our intentions, basically. So one of the things that I wanted to highlight here is lessons from vegan movement, looking at the success. We've seen that groundswell undesired human choices is possible. Again, I think it was you, Harry, who highlighted this already, that it wasn't it came as a surprise that the vegan movement, that was a fringe movement, became global, and now the way it's marching on, it did well beyond any of our imagination, which basically shows that the groundswell sort of thing is not only idealistic, like something that is limited in the imagination, but it is a possible thing. So basically, it suggests that the ground is ready and many factors are aligned for it. And as we speak, in the current given situation, that needs to be exploited, of course. And also having various motivating factors for the behavior change helps. One thing that we see among vegans or activists is that there's this sense of superiority, of course, because you've made sacrifices, you've used, rationality, you've used, better choices for so many different reasons, and that is definitely something that must and should and obviously does make one feel better about themselves. But then there's that the supremacy also sometimes makes it very imposing, and I think it was Dave and both Harry highlighted earlier already that there's a whole background. There's the social, there's the traditional side of things, what family you were brought up in. So like this individual shaming because of people's choices. If that could, be addressed somehow within the practice, I think we would do even more better, and also understanding and recognizing other motivating factors, because there's that purist agenda somewhere that unless it is for animal welfare, it is because of your health reasons, or it is because of the ecological, environmental. It's not good enough kind of feeling, that I've many times noticed myself personally, coming from the actors of the change. That is something that we need to be working on. Having alternative choices, we already talked about this, and this is something that I will also highlight a bit later. This is the availability or the convenience of the alternative, of access to the alternative. So all these things are aligned, and these are good lessons to keep in mind when we design our own interventions for human behavior change for animal welfare, farm animal welfare particularly. Looking at the limitations, we know that the ground swell needs to be met halfway from the top level, like I talked about. I think there's a good drive among the mass now, but then that needs to be harnessed and hit really hard on the institutional level as well, because the institutional level is definitely, they felt the heat, whether it's the government or even businesses or other entities. We talked about some United Nations entities even. There's definitely some heat that has been realized, but I think we could do better on in terms of hitting on the institutional level, so it comes and meets the very groundswell from the denizen level somewhere halfway there. There is a need for more alternative choices, of course. There's one example of I'm not sure if you've recently heard about the Oat Milk Fiasco. It has made lives of many people, because there's this realization, there's the guilt even for many animal product users. And I personally, while I say this, I personally am not an exception to that. There are there's still many choices that I need to, claim, basically, and they're not easy. They're not always easy. So the availability of things, the oat milk is a great example, because I've personally known many people who have been able to quit dairy milk because that alternative is available now, and how the again, from the institutional level, how the big giants have tried to kind of take control of that, whether it's for better or worse. That's all another thing that time will show, but there's that interest, like more alternative needs to come. The economic narrative has always been in favor of the intensive farming. Basically, intensive farming, it pays well. It gives better return. Countries like Nepal are now being used as breeding ground for pigs to be exported to China. Again, it's easy to finger point to blame China, their insatiable greed and demand and need and whatnot. But again, it's capitalism. Like we all have enjoyed capitalism. So let's go for better alternatives and we start making money with better choices. Yeah. So I think from the interventionist level as well, these are the market needs to be exploited as well. So from the focus on the denizen level, where we are sensitizing people. I think sensitization in many communities and many parts of the world, especially the first world, is even saturated, to the extent that people have started feeling a little bit like too much. Now that needs to be met with the availability of the better alternative choices, and that is where the market, I think, is needs to be really pushed. That is where our interventionist attentions could be focused. So market space is another important factor. The more market space, because there's certain there's a limitation in how much people can pay, or how much people will be spending on, or how much people can consume, whether it's vegan choices or vegetarian choices, or darkly products of butchers and whatnot. There's a limitation of how much intake can happen. So more space, the more market space, better alternative choices take, the better for our movement, basically. And that is another reason why we need to look more into the market side of things as well. Even though our work might be more, have been so far focusing on the educational and sensitization side of things. So basically, just to summarize the five-dimensional framework of behavior change, there's the structural side of things. There's material, which is structural is basically the institutions, the rules, and those kind of things. Material is the availability of resources and so on. There's social. On the social side is basically sensitization, influencing, network, support network, role models, and whatnot. And then there's the very individual side of things. We've already talked about how the vegan movement, like individual to individual, has changed. But all of these factors have been very crucial. And also there's the global side of things, the standard setting, the values and trends on the global side of things, the capitalism, the globalization. Everything has had its mark. So all of this, if every time we, as an interventionist, because I like I said earlier, my focus in today's talk is basically to my fellow interventionists or to fellow welfareists, that every time we design an intervention, two things are very crucial. One thing is to understand what kind of world we are working in. Like the thing that we talked in the very beginning, because that will determine what sort of tools, what sets of tools we will be needing. And the other thing is, when we design an intervention, what is the saturation like? What aspect that we see in this framework, which one of this is okay, and what needs more focus? And then we can, I think, maximize and create more efficient and more productive intervention based on this brilliant model that was proposed by Cislagi and Heiss in 2017. So that's that. Pretty much. So basically, like my discussion point here is phases of changes. Dodge it or ride it out. Basically, this is what I mean with this is there are this traditional, still like very traditional worlds, nuggets of worlds, communities that have never seen sausages, and there's these are the ideas that go in my head, because do we completely dodge the sausage phase and then bring them to a sort of vegetarian or vegan phase, with the level of understanding and the sensitization? Or is it inevitable that we will have to go through that particular phase and somehow just ride it out in the best, most efficient way possible? Those phases of changes are very crucial, because in the debate concerning veganism, say for example, is always that the first world has already done it. They've already done it. They've seen it. Now they are in this comfort level of having all these different resources available, and now it's easy for them to talk about it. So it just basically creates this rift again, which is why the understanding of which world you're representing or which world you're working in really matters. So this is something that calls for thought. Dodge it or ride it out based on what particular world you are working in. Key change instigators. Again, I talked about the institutional hammering. If we can find out what is causing the bottleneck in the in this movement going like full-fledged, to maximize the output of the amount of energy and work and time we put in our campaigns, to further the movement. If we can just identify the key change instigators, what could be, what entity or what institution could be the key change instigator that can really help us achieve that. Addressing the market bottleneck, we already talked about. Okay, there's this like a really increasing number of vegans that are now vegans, but I'm pretty sure there's a much larger number of people who want to morally, within their conscience, they want to become vegan. They want to make better alternative, compassionate choices, but then they are still that elephant that gets distracted with this and that, and that would be really easily addressed, much easier if there were if the market bottle products available, say for example, it's not about calcium or protein only, but milk has to be replaced with milk, which is why the oat milk is, oat milk's success. That's one thing that I take away from that particular case study. Also, welfare actors and the gap and opportunities. Like I said, this talk was particularly, targeting welfare actors. So there are gaps and there are obviously opportunities in the field of using human behavior change as a science, as a technique, as a practice and notion. And there, the gaps need to be identified and worked on, and the opportunities need to be exploited, basically. That's that, really. Yeah, thank you. So I hope I didn't take extra time, and now I believe we're open for questions. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Manoj. Fantastic presentation. We have actually just gone into being a little bit over time, but it's such a sprawling topic. I think between all three speakers, we've really covered a lot of ground, so thanks again to all. I'm happy to continue fielding a couple of questions for an extra 5 or 10 minutes if the speakers all have time to do so. Do you all have an extra 5 or 10 minutes? Yeah, okay, fantastic. So first of all, a question from Facebook, just on a purely practical level. The user is asking, will these sessions be shared and where? I wanted to mention, for anyone who wasn't aware, that World Day for Farmed Animals Asia is a collaboration between many animal protection NGOs, the 3 here represented and quite a few more. So Asia for Animals Coalition was happy to kind of support that, and we've created a central website. So if you visit asiaforanimals.com/WDFA Asia, then we will put a space there where you can register for all the videos for this session and all the others, which have covered like a vast range of topics. So yeah, they'll be up. World Day for Farmed Animals Asia is actually this Friday, October 2nd. And so we'll try and get those uploaded sort of between now and Friday and going into next week. And they'll all be on the Asia for Animals YouTube as well. There was another question from Facebook here, which was really for Dave, which he's kind of addressed. Can Animals Asia liaison with other animal welfare groups in Western countries, such as Animals Australia, to bring this program to our schools in Australia? And Dave has answered saying, I can make the general resources on the animal concepts that we have available to anybody that has the opportunity to use them, and he's given his contact details there. Just to expand on that as well, a great thing about Asia for Animals Coalition is that, for example, Animals Australia is a member of our extended network, and something like the animal concepts program that Dave has established is, that's the kind of resource that we want to share out. It's not like anyone has ownership over it. And so Asia for Animals is a great way to disseminate things like that. So thanks for that answer, Dave. Another question on that for Dave is, can members of the public download the, so in your slides you had the Animals Asia materials with the chickens and pigs and whatever, which are like, I'm like you, or, can we download those? I see that there are some materials on animalsasia.org, and members of the public can also email media@animalsasia.org. And you said they're available in different languages, in Vietnamese, for example, Dave.
Yeah, we do. We've got them. I mean, we've produced the resources in English, in Chinese, and in Vietnamese. They're not, I don't think they're anywhere for people to actually download themselves. If that's something which, you know, we could make available, then I don't have any problem with that. I mean, they're poster resources. They can be used for whatever format, you know, they can be used in. If people want to, if we want to sort of make them into something which could be shared on social media or something like that, then I'm more than happy for that to happen. So far, we've really only used them. We've been using them at physical events, as in we've been producing them and then using them in schools, using them in universities when there's an actual physical event. So they're more sort of like designed at the moment to be printed as posters. But yeah, I'm happy for us, you know, if there's an opportunity for us within Animals Asia to make those, or within Asia for Animals to make those much more accessible, then there's no reason why we can't look into doing that for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you say, through the coalition as well, we can look to do that. So yeah, thank you very much, Dave. We've got a question for Harry, but just quickly before that, I just wanted to let especially the panelists know that we've had some really, really lovely comments on facebook.com/animalsasia. So if you want to read those and you know, the gratitude for your fantastic talks, and visit the comments there. Harry, regarding your presentation, there was a question. So on your slide, which was 2 out of every 3 farmed animals is factory farmed. And what would you say about the 1 out of 3? Basically, the one which is situated in rural areas which aren't factory farmed, but they do use their products on a daily basis. What do you think about them? Are they ethical? Would you say that the use of those animals is ethical?
It's less about ethical, because it depends on what position you take in regards to our use of animals. You know, from my personal point of view, I don't think we should be eating animals at all, and therefore any use of animals in that way is not particularly ethical. But when we're talking in a welfare perspective, then obviously there are different impacts. Factory farming, as Dave and Manoj both pointed out in their excellent presentations, you know, you look at the limitations of welfare and the compromises that are made for animals, they are far greater in a factory farm setting. So that's not to say that the 1 out of 3 are doing absolutely fine. As Manoj said, yeah, they're going to get killed at the end of it, even if they're living up in a field in kind of like rural Nepal. At the end of the day, they're still going to get killed. There are still welfare compromises, but the animals that are not in a factory farm setting will, to a degree, and it depends on the specific settings, be able to live potentially a life closer to the aspects that Dave was talking about in his presentation. You know, they're going to have more availability to display natural behaviors and do all of, and play out all of the emotional needs. That's not to say that it's ethical, but it's a factor that we have to be aware of when we're talking in the broadest context of animal welfare. But yeah, if we're talking about the absolute number, that's 80 billion in animals a year. That's, you know, 3 out of 3 animals are going to end up on a plate somewhere. So you can argue the ethics of it, but when we're talking about a welfare perspective, we have to look at where the greatest need is, and the greatest compromises on animal welfare in the factory farm setting right now, in farm setting now, are factory farming. Yes, we want to deal with the other stuff, but we need to know what the difference is between those 2 things.
Yeah, absolutely. And it goes back to what Manoj said about, you know, the movement has to be strategic, and the movement is only so big, and so we have to know how to direct ourselves. Okay, fantastic. Thank you for that. I think there are no more questions. I know that I shouldn't do this because I'm the compere, but I just had one last thing I'd like to hear from Harry on, and kind of tying to, again, Manoj's idea about strategizing. Harry, I wondered if you could just say a few more words about hbcforanimals.com. That's Human Behaviour Change for Animals, and you do consultancy and research and events. What goes on there, and if there are any NGOs still listening in the audience here, and they were thinking about using the concepts of this talk in their strategies, what would be the approach to working with them?
Well, Human Behaviour Change for Animals is an organization started by Joe White and Suzanne Rogers. And if anybody that's out there that's listening to this or watching this that is interested in the elements that all of us have talked about today, relationship between human behavior, attitudes and behaviors, and changing those in relation to how we use and treat animals, then definitely check out the website, humanbehaviorchangeforanimals.org or .com. It's one of those. I can't remember which one it is, but it's one of those things. We can post a link for it in the comment section here. Already is. There you go. hbcforanimals.com. You can contact them directly via the website, and there's a huge wealth of resources that we literally just scratched the surface of today about concepts in human behavior change, stuff that is kind of overview, general public kind of stuff, but also goes into enormous amount of academic detail for people that are interested in the far deeper aspects of human behavior change. They work with a range of advisors, including myself, but there's a wealth of experience and knowledge contained with human behavior change for animals. So if you contact them directly, they will be more than happy to help anybody out and give advice and point them in directions of ways of using human behavior change elements to support any NGO's program to better their work and reach out to the general public or whichever campaign or project you're working on.
Great. Thanks, Harry. Well, yeah, thank you everyone again, the attendees for your extra time and attention, and thank you panelists for your extra time. I think that's us. We're ready to conclude now, no extra questions. So yeah, thanks again to all panelists, and you'll see the recording on Facebook immediately, and then the, as I say, the highlights of the series will be online in due course.
Thanks very much, Craig.
Thanks, Craig.
Thanks, Harry, Manoj.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Dave. See you, Manoj.